On a crisp February morning in 1989, the passengers of Independent Air Flight 1851 embarked on what was meant to be the journey of a lifetime, a charter flight to the tropical paradise of Punta Cana. Families laughed, friends shared stories, and the cabin buzzed with excitement. But as the Boeing 707 approached its stopover in the Azores, an invisible danger loomed ahead. In the heart of the Atlantic, where jagged peaks pierced the clouds, the pilots of Flight 1851 faced a deadly combination of miscommunication and treacherous terrain. What unfolded next would shock the world, leaving a scar in aviation history and earning the name the Disaster of the Azores. What went wrong on that fateful flight? And how did a series of seemingly small errors lead to Portugal's deadliest aviation tragedy? Stay with us as we uncover the haunting details of Independent Air Flight 1851. Independent Air Flight 1851 cruised steadily above the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, carrying 137 tourists on board. It was an American charter flight with a scheduled refueling stop ahead. Less than 30 minutes from their destination, the crew began to prepare for their descent. The calm, professional voice of the controller in Santa Maria responded to their request for a weather report, confirming winds at 260 degrees at 14 knots. The flight engineer, Jorge Gonzalez, a 34-year-old with a sterling reputation from his time in the U.S. Air Force, monitored conditions carefully. Captain Leon James Doherty, 41 years old and also with a military background, had been flying jetliners for almost a decade. His command that day exuded experience, reinforced by the balanced dynamic of the crew, who had flown together for over a week without issues. First Officer Sammy Adcock, at 36, was the newest member, having joined the airline only 2 weeks earlier. The Boeing 707 they operated, though not modern by the standards of 1989, was well-maintained and compliant with all safety regulations despite its 21-year service. Their route from Bergamo, Italy, was planned to include a stopover at Santa Maria in the Azores before continuing to Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic. Santa Maria, known for its strategic location in the Atlantic, offered a convenient refueling point, albeit with the challenge of its prominent peak, Pico Alto, rising almost 2,000 feet in the center of the island. The crew exchanged procedural acknowledgments as they passed flight level 220, with Adcock tuning into Santa Maria's frequency. The tower was managed by a trainee controller under the watch of a supervisor, a common situation at an airport with only 3 scheduled flights per day and no radar system, a scenario demanding precise communication and navigation. With their clearance to descend to 3,000 feet on a QNH of 1027, the crew prepared for the approach to runway 19. The weather, though generally clear, included patches of cloud cover around Pico Alto, a typical feature in the area. The captain disengaged the autopilot, taking manual control of the aircraft, a customary move to get a better feel of its handling during the final phase of the flight. The crew readied themselves, securing seatbelts and harnesses as a precaution. As they neared the airport, with cloud cover still potentially impeding visibility, the captain prepared for an instrument landing system (ILS) approach, coordinating with the first officer to set the necessary parameters. This system would allow them to navigate safely through the clouds if needed, ensuring they maintained precise vertical and horizontal guidance toward the runway. As the aircraft neared its final approach, the significance of assistance became increasingly clear. Just 35 miles from the airport, the sweeping coastline of Santa Maria emerged on the horizon, hinting at the island's jagged beauty. Approaching from the east, towering cliffs interspersed with expanses of lush greenery appeared, a sight that both reassured and obscured their destination. Yet, despite the breathtaking view, the pilots couldn't spot the airport. It was positioned on the far side of the island, hidden from their immediate line of sight. As the flight pushed closer, an unexpected alert filled the cockpit, indicating that they were 500 feet above their designated altitude. The pilot's voice, tinged with uncertainty, broke the tension. 400 to go. The uncertainty of whether they would gain visual contact with their target loomed large. Moments later, as the aircraft pierced through cloud layers, the situation grew tense. Coastal winds, known for their fierce unpredictability, swept against the plane, challenging the crew's ability to maintain control. "Can't keep this damn thing level," one muttered, frustration seeping into the professional calm of the cockpit. With every mile that passed, the stakes escalated. Barely 2 minutes out, Flight 1851 roared low overhead, alarmingly close to the rugged landscape. A sharp, urgent voice commanded, "Pull up! Pull up!" as the cockpit system's warnings reverberated, signals that spelled impending peril. Just 4.5 miles from the Santa Maria airport, the serene island awoke to chaos. The aircraft had collided with Pico Alto, the island's highest mountain, unleashing devastation upon the serene landscape. The crash site, strewn across the unforgiving terrain, painted a heart-wrenching picture of disarray. Wreckage was scattered amidst steep inclines, and sparse fires flickered as silent witnesses to the tragedy. Locals, accustomed to tranquility, found themselves grappling with a disaster that would mark the darkest day in their history. With a population of only 5,000, Santa Maria suddenly bore the weight of Portugal's most harrowing aviation accident. As night fell, search and rescue efforts pressed on. By dawn, the Portuguese Civil Aviation Authority, DGIC, had reached the scene, soon joined by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, from the United States. The rescuers, navigating treacherous conditions, came upon poignant reminders of lost lives, personal belongings scattered amid the wreckage, and the dolls of children, trapped like specters in the trees. It was a scene defined by profound sorrow and overwhelming devastation. Investigation teams urgently sought to reconstruct the final moments of Flight 1851. Overhead views provided a stark revelation. The debris, concentrated along the mountainside, marked a controlled descent into terrain. The analysis pointed towards a phenomenon known as controlled flight into terrain, CFIT, where a functioning aircraft inadvertently crashes into an obstacle due to navigation errors. Initial assessments suggested the plane struck just 140 feet below the recorded height of Pico Alto, an altitude error, or perhaps human oversight, that spelled catastrophe. Determining the reason behind the crew's critical lapse, whether miscalculation or misjudgment, became paramount. With minimum sector altitudes set at 3,000 feet, ensuring clearance above all surrounding terrain, the aircraft's lower trajectory signaled a breach that demanded answers. The investigation team meticulously pieced together the sequence of events, starting with the pilot's operational procedures and decisions. The company's operations manual required at least 2 Jefferson charts to be on board every flight. Yet this flight descended alarmingly below the prescribed altitude. The charts clearly indicated a minimum safe altitude of 3,000 feet, particularly critical given the mountainous terrain of Santa Maria Island. This raised a pivotal question. Why did the crew choose to fly so low when they were undoubtedly aware of these critical guidelines? As the investigation unfolded, the team turned their focus to the air traffic controller who had been on duty during the incident. According to the controller, the minimum sector altitude communicated to the pilots was indeed 3,000 feet. He had even documented this on his flight strip, demonstrating a calm and professional demeanor when questioned. A supervisor had also been present, as was standard at this relatively quiet airport, where under-job training for trainees often coincided with active operations. The controller reported that weather conditions at the airport were favorable, clear skies with no rain or strong winds, and decent visibility. However, cloud cover at higher altitudes and the unpredictable nature of winds near Pico Alto posed potential challenges for the crew. Despite the clouds, the pilots had their instruments to guide them. No mechanical issues had been reported to air traffic control, which left investigators puzzled. With no immediate answers, the team speculated about the possibility of unreported mechanical failures affecting the plane's ability to maintain altitude. To verify this, they needed to delve into the wreckage and examine the aircraft's systems. The wreckage provided critical insights. An examination of the engines revealed they had been functioning at the time of impact. Evidence of vegetation ingested into the engines confirmed they were operational up to the moment of collision. This ruled out engine failure as a cause. Investigators then turned to the altimeters, devices crucial for altitude measurement. If the altimeters had malfunctioned, the crew might have believed they were flying higher than they actually were. However, The service records showed the altimeters had been calibrated just 4 months prior with no reported issues. Unfortunately, the damage to the devices rendered them untestable. The team shifted their attention to the altitude alert system, designed to warn pilots when approaching a preset altitude. Remarkably, they discovered the alert system had survived the crash. Upon closer examination, it revealed an unsettling finding. The altitude alert had been set to 2,000 feet, 1,000 feet below the safe minimum altitude for the area. This discrepancy introduced a new line of inquiry, further deepening the mystery surrounding the fatal descent. The investigation unraveled a perplexing chain of events, one that left everyone involved in disbelief. The altitude reading of 2,000 feet, instead of the required 3,000 feet, startled the team. How could such a significant discrepancy arise? It seemed implausible, especially since the air traffic controller had cleared the flight for 3,000 feet. Could it have been a mistake by the controller, or was it a miscommunication? The team resolved to examine the ATC tapes, determined to uncover the truth. Reviewing the air traffic control recordings provided a detailed account of all communications during the flight. The tapes unequivocally confirmed that the controller had, in fact, twice given the clearance for 3,000 feet. Yet, this did not clarify how the altimeter alert was set to 2,000 feet. The investigators turned to the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, hoping it would shed light on the error. Listening to the cockpit recordings revealed a puzzling exchange. The first officer responded to the clearance by reading it back as 2,000 feet rather than 3,000. A replay of the recording confirmed the error. He had clearly stated 2,000 feet. The team speculated that the first officer might have misheard 3,000 as simply 2,000, failing to catch the critical 3. This misinterpretation raised more questions than answers. Why had the controller not corrected the first officer? Was the misread altitude ever even heard by the controller? The investigation took an unsettling turn when the team cross-referenced the CVR with the controller's transcript. The first officer's incorrect readback of 2,000 feet was absent from the controller's recording. How could this be? The absence of such a critical exchange seemed unfathomable, until the team identified a chilling realization: overlapping transmissions. The simultaneous communication between the tower and the cockpit had effectively canceled each other out, leaving the controller unaware of the error. As this realization set in, the team replayed the recordings, pinpointing the moments of overlap. The transmissions had meshed together so perfectly that neither side recognized the mistake. This miscommunication was both startling and tragic. For the investigators, understanding how such a confluence of errors could occur was a sobering moment, one that underscored the fragile nature of communication in aviation. The seasoned investigator, reflecting on a 30-year career with the NTSB, admitted this incident stood out as uniquely perplexing, unlike anything encountered before or since. The core of the tragedy lay in the missteps surrounding the push-to-talk (PTT) system used by pilots and air traffic controllers. Both the pilots and the controllers were speaking simultaneously, each pressing their PTT buttons, effectively blocking mutual communication. This basic yet fatal flaw contributed to a cascading series of errors. In aviation, certain protocols are non-negotiable, such as the mandatory readback of critical instructions, including altitude clearances. Yet here, the trainee controller failed to request an altitude readback, and shockingly, the supervising controller overlooked this lapse. Investigators speculated whether the supervisor had been distracted during this crucial moment. Phone records revealed she took a call during her shift, an inexcusable distraction during an operation as critical as descent clearance. The situation worsened when it was discovered that the plane's altimeter alert had been incorrectly set to 2,000 feet. Even so, the aircraft should have cleared the ridge by approximately 200 feet. The investigators, however, needed to understand why the aircraft struck the mountain at an altitude even lower than the erroneous setting suggested. A closer examination revealed discrepancies in the QNH values, a pressure setting essential for accurate altitude measurement. The pilots received two vastly different QNH readings within just 12 minutes, 1019 and 1027. Such an abrupt change, investigators concluded, was implausible under normal weather conditions, occurring only in extreme events like hurricanes. This error led to a miscalculated altitude, placing the aircraft dangerously 200 feet lower than expected, directly on a collision course with Pico Alto. The investigation uncovered that this discrepancy stemmed from the controller, who could not explain why the incorrect QNH had been communicated. When asked directly, the controller admitted uncertainty, claiming to have no recollection of where the erroneous figure had originated. The rapid shift in QNH should have been apparent to both the trainee and the supervisor, yet it slipped by unnoticed, ultimately sealing the fate of the flight. In the end, it became evident that this tragic event was the result of a perfect storm of human error, procedural lapses, and overlooked inconsistencies. The failure to ensure accurate communication, compounded by inattention to critical details, turned what should have been routine into a devastating accident. The investigation delved deeper into the cockpit interactions to understand the cascade of errors that led to the tragedy. It began with a surprising lack of communication between the pilots. The first officer, after misreading the minimum descent altitude, questioned the QNH, a vital measurement for safe navigation. Yet when the captain dismissively confirmed the incorrect reading, the first officer, perhaps due to the hierarchy and assertiveness of his superior, chose to accept it without further challenge. This interaction revealed a troubling dynamic. The captain's authority effectively silenced any potential for collaborative problem-solving. This dynamic left a lingering question: what other critical errors might they have overlooked? Investigators turned to the cockpit voice recorder for answers, replaying the moments leading up to the approach to Santa Maria. They noted a glaring omission in the pilot's checklist procedures. While they completed standard checks like securing seatbelts and harnesses, they failed to mention the minimum descent altitude or the critical details of Pico Alto. Even a basic review of the navigation charts was absent from their pre-landing briefing. Had they conducted a thorough approach review, it is highly likely that the subsequent errors could have been avoided. Instead, critical procedural gaps compounded the risks. Adding to the confusion was the presence of an unknown female voice in the cockpit during the descent, likely a flight attendant. Her presence violated the sterile cockpit rule, which mandates no non-essential conversation below 10,000 feet. The captain not only allowed this distraction, but appeared unbothered by the breach. This laxity underscored a broader culture of complacency in the cockpit. Rather than maintaining a sharp focus on the approach, the pilots were notably relaxed, even engaging in casual chatter about Santa Maria and having a beer after landing. As the plane descended further, the errors multiplied. The captain instructed a descent to 2,000 feet without verifying its safety against the surrounding terrain. When the ground proximity warning system, GPWS, began to sound, signaling imminent danger, the cockpit fell eerily silent. No one questioned the alarm. No one took corrective action. 7 seconds later, the aircraft struck the mountain. The investigators' analysis of the flight data painted a grim picture. Despite the GPWS alert, there was no attempt to change altitude or correct course. The crew's lack of reaction sealed the plane's fate. The chain of errors, from miscommunication to procedural lapses and complacency, culminated in a preventable disaster. It was a sobering reminder of how small, unchecked mistakes can snowball into catastrophic consequences. The investigation unfolded a grim sequence of events, exposing the layers of mistakes and systemic flaws that led to the crash. The data revealed a chilling reality. The pilots did not take any corrective action in response to the alarms. The ground proximity warning system, GPWS, sounded, demanding immediate action, maximum power, and a steep climb to evade the looming danger. Yet the crew remained unresponsive during the critical 7 seconds that could have saved the aircraft. 7 seconds was all they had to clear the mountain, and tragically, it was enough time, if only they had acted. The investigators were baffled. The crew had undergone training and should have known to react instinctively to such warnings. But as they delved into the airline's training protocols, a startling discovery emerged. The simulators used for crew training were calibrated differently from the accident aircraft. During simulations, the GPWS often triggered false alarms during normal approaches. This anomaly had inadvertently conditioned the pilots to ignore the system's warnings, a fatal habit. Independent Air had relied on rented simulators that did not match their fleet's configurations. Flap settings and approach speeds differed, leading to GPWS alerts during standard training scenarios. The crew, having been trained to disregard these alarms, carried that mindset into real-life operations, effectively neutralizing the one system designed to save them in moments of imminent danger. Further analysis revealed a cascade of errors. The first officer misheard the assigned altitude, setting it incorrectly at 2,000 feet instead of the correct 3,000 feet. The mistake could have been caught and corrected if he had double-checked the charts, or if the air traffic controller had requested a readback. This single misstep set the stage for disaster, placing the aircraft on a collision course with Pico Alto. Compounding the issue was a lack of cockpit discipline. Conversations unrelated to the flight distracted the crew during the final approach. A sterile cockpit, a regulation designed to eliminate non-essential communication, might have prevented such lapses in focus. Even so, had the captain ensured the altimeter was correctly set or the GPWS warning was heeded, the aircraft could have climbed to safety, clearing the mountain by over 1,000 feet. The National Transportation Safety Board's final report concluded that the crash resulted from an accumulation of small errors, any one of which, if avoided, could have prevented the tragedy. In response, they recommended comprehensive reviews of airline training programs, emphasizing the importance of GPWS protocols and stricter adherence to international safety standards. For the victims' families, justice came in the form of a $34 million settlement, though no amount of compensation could erase the loss of 144 lives. The airline ceased operations shortly after the incident, a somber reminder that complacency in aviation can have catastrophic consequences. The tragedy of Flight 1851 underscored a harsh truth. In the skies, even the smallest oversight can lead to disaster. Closing narrative. The story of Independent Air Flight 1851 is a chilling reminder of how critical precision and communication are in aviation. The loss of 144 lives that day left an indelible mark on history, prompting changes aimed at ensuring such tragedies never happen again. Thank you for joining us on this journey to uncover the events behind the disaster of the Azores. Your time and attention mean the world to us. If you found this video insightful, please consider sharing your thoughts or suggestions in the comments below. We're always striving to improve and bring you the most compelling stories. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content. We appreciate your support and understanding as we continue to grow and learn together. Thank you, and see you in the next video.